"You can't build a medieval fortress in a suburban neighborhood," Karen shrieked, standing ankle-deep in a puddle as thunder cracked behind her like an overly dramatic movie soundtrack. She held a trembling clipboard in one hand and an aggressively highlighted sketch in the other, drawn on what suspiciously looked like a napkin from the HOA's last brunch meeting. I just stood there on my driveway, holding a wrench in one hand, trying not to laugh as she tried to outshout the storm. The garage wasn't even finished yet, but apparently it had already become the greatest threat to suburban harmony since someone's nephew installed a trampoline last summer. It all started 2 weeks earlier when I decided to extend my garage. Nothing dramatic, just 10 extra feet to make room for a workbench and to finally fit both my truck and the lawn gear without playing vehicular Tetris every time I needed a rake. The construction crew was local, licensed, and everything was up to code. I'd filed permits, checked with the county office, and even double-measured the boundary line with the official land surveyor. Everything was clean, legal, and approved. That, unfortunately, didn't mean much when the HOA's personal harbinger of doom, Karen, saw it. Karen had a reputation in the neighborhood. She didn't just enforce the HOA rules, she weaponized them. Once, she cited a resident for leaving their Christmas lights up on January 3rd. Another time, she nearly had someone fined for their mailbox being painted an emotionally jarring shade of blue. So it wasn't exactly shocking when she came stomping onto my driveway the moment the framing went up. "This violates property line 7B of the HOA covenant," she barked, pointing to the construction site like she was summoning the wrath of some suburban deity. I blinked. Property line 7B? I'd never even heard of that clause, and I'd read the entire rulebook cover to cover after Karen tried to fine me for growing cucumbers too close to the sidewalk. Still, I kept my cool. I showed her the county's stamped boundary approval and the surveyor's report. She didn't even look at them. "I have maps," she said with unearned authority, waving her soggy napkin like it was a royal decree. "This garage overhangs into HOA communal space. I'm giving you 48 hours to halt construction or we'll impose penalties." The construction guys were watching this whole thing unfold, trying very hard not to laugh. One of them, a guy named Rick, leaned over and muttered, "Should have built a drawbridge instead of a garage." At the time, it was just a joke, but the seed was planted. I asked Karen where exactly this supposed communal space was, because according to every map I had, the garage was still 1.5 feet within my property. She just squinted at me and jabbed her finger toward a line in the mud created by rainwater runoff and construction boot. "Right there. That's the historical HOA boundary." So let me get this straight. I was being fined over a line in the mud? I asked her to produce official documentation, anything more than her sketch. She said it was pending. She turned and stomped off like she'd just delivered a verdict from the Supreme Court. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope duct-taped to my mailbox. A formal citation from the HOA, $4,500 for unauthorized structural overreach. With a countdown timer printed in red ink at the bottom. Demolition must begin in 72 hours. I nearly choked on my coffee. This wasn't just about a garage. This was Karen going full-throttle dictator because she didn't like not being consulted. I immediately filed an appeal with the HOA board, only to discover that the board had held an emergency vote about my case the night before. I wasn't invited. My name wasn't even on the mailing list. Apparently, Karen had called the meeting claiming community safety concerns. The only safety hazard was the risk of her tripping over her own ego. When I asked my neighbor Doug about it, he used to be on the board before retiring in frustration, he said, "They're just trying to wear you down. Classic HOA playbook. Make it miserable until you cave." But I don't cave. I build. I went to the county office the next day with every permit and blueprint I had. The clerk on duty took one look and said, "You're golden. But if you really want to make a point," he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. That night, I was sitting on my porch with my uncle, cracking open a couple of cold ones. He told me how years ago, his HOA in Arizona tried to pull something similar. So he dug a retention ditch around the disputed land and filled it with water lilies and a fake crocodile head. He called it a defensive landscaping maneuver. We laughed. Then I stopped laughing. What if I did it for real? I called my engineer friend Ray the next morning. He owed me a favor after I helped him haul 20 bags of concrete for his patio project last summer. I told him I wanted to dig a 12-foot wide moat exactly along the line Karen insisted was communal property. He asked if I was drunk. I wasn't. I was enlightened. He started laughing, then said, "Okay, let's make it stormwater compliant and fully code legal. You want piranhas in there or just koi fish?" We got to work drafting the plans. The permit office approved it under erosion control landscaping, since the area had frequent runoff issues anyway. I wasn't just allowed to build the moat, I was legally encouraged to. A week later, we broke ground. Karen stood across the street filming every minute, ranting on Facebook Live about how I was destroying neighborhood character. Her comments section, however, had other ideas. People started rooting for the moat. "It's giving castle energy," one person wrote. "Karen's about to be the first HOA rep to lose a land war in suburbia," said another. By the time the trench was halfway dug, she showed up again, this time with backup. 2 other board members flanked her like henchmen in a bad superhero movie. She was waving an emergency injunction, screaming that I was creating a hostile water barrier. I just smiled, pulled out a copy of the permit, and handed it to her. "It's not a hostile water barrier," I said. "It's decorative hydrological landscaping. County approved." And that's when the storm really rolled in, not just the thunderclouds overhead, but the battle lines being drawn. Karen had made her power play. I was about to make mine, with shovels, pumps, and a 12-foot moat. Let the HOA games begin. By the time the first scoop of dirt was removed from what would become the moat, the HOA had entered full-blown panic mode. Karen began organizing neighborhood meetings under the guise of land preservation education, which was basically her personal anti-moat campaign dressed up in eco-friendly language. She distributed flyers printed with grainy images of my garage and the moat plans, warning that unsanctioned trenching could lead to property value collapse, rodent migration, and dangerous standing water. One flyer even claimed I was planning to import venomous frogs from the Amazon. Meanwhile, my contractor Ray, now fully invested in the pettiness of the project, printed those flyers on mugs and handed them out to the construction crew as morale boosters. But beneath the comedy, we still had to build everything by the book. Ray brought in a landscaping architect and a stormwater compliance officer to ensure every inch of the project was airtight. They designed the moat to serve multiple purposes: decorative, functional, and legal. Its primary purpose on paper was to channel rainwater runoff into an underground filtration system that led to a storm drain. But what people would see was a stunning 12-foot wide moat, complete with stone edging, ambient lights, and a drawbridge-style entrance I had commissioned from a local metal artist who usually did installations for modern art galleries. The moat would be a masterpiece, and more importantly, untouchable. The funny thing was, while the HOA was screeching about communal aesthetics and hostile ditches, the county inspector had nothing but praise. When he arrived on site to verify the permit specs, he walked the perimeter with a grin and said, "Honestly, this is probably the coolest water retention system I've seen all year." Karen, of course, trailed behind him, arms folded, whispering complaints about potential mosquito infestations and medieval symbolism. The inspector ignored her entirely, nodded at me, and said, "Carry on, sir." Karen's frustration was volcanic. That same afternoon, she sent a mass email to the neighborhood claiming I had exploited a legal loophole and was encouraging structural anarchy. Ironically, all she did was drive more attention to the project. A local blogger caught wind of it, showed up with a drone, and posted a video tour of the partially finished moat online with the caption, "Castle Vibes in Suburbia." The post went viral. Within days, news crews were calling me for interviews. At first, I declined. I didn't want to escalate things too far. But when Karen started circulating a petition to have my construction halted, complete with fabricated claims about the trench threatening underground utility lines, I decided it was time to speak out. I invited the local morning news to come over for a tour. I made coffee, laid out donuts, and gave the full rundown. All permits approved, all guidelines followed, and all inspections passed. The footage aired the next day with a hilarious slow-motion zoom-in of Karen standing in the background, glaring into the camera like a rejected movie villain. The response from the public was overwhelming. People from all over the country began commenting, emailing, even sending handwritten letters. Some offered landscaping tips. Others offered moat-themed decor. One guy from Oregon offered to send me a taxidermied alligator to float in it. A schoolteacher from Wisconsin asked if I'd do a Zoom call with her class about residential resistance through architecture. I was officially becoming moat famous. And Karen was spiraling. Meanwhile, the construction was speeding along. The base of the trench was laid with reinforced concrete. The filtration system was installed beneath it with layered gravel and a built-in pump to prevent stagnation. Ray added custom water channels that allowed the entire thing to fill naturally with rain while draining excess through a filter box. Then came the real flair. Slate stones around the edge, solar-powered LEDs that lit up with a soft glow at night, and carved corner markers shaped like miniature lions. The drawbridge entrance, still in fabrication, would be installed last. For now, we used a temporary wooden bridge, which the crew jokingly called the plank. Of course, Karen wasn't finished. Late one evening, motion sensors on the property picked up activity near the trench. When I reviewed the security footage, there she was, clad in black workout gear, dragging 2 heavy bags of mulch toward the trench. She opened one and began dumping it in, apparently thinking it would clog the system. It didn't. The drainage design was so precise it handled the mess without a hiccup. But the attempt itself crossed a line. I sent the footage directly to the sheriff's office and, for good measure, to the HOA's legal committee. Within days, Karen was stripped of her landscaping oversight chair role. That incident also convinced several residents, who had previously kept silent, to speak up. A neighbor named Javier, whose backyard faced my property, told me, "Honestly, the moat's kinda awesome. I watch it while I drink my coffee. Way more peaceful than staring at Karen pacing in front of your driveway for the 5th day in a row." Another neighbor brought over fresh bread and thanked me for standing up to the madness. Apparently, Karen had once tried to ban wind chimes for being spiritually disruptive. By now, the HOA board was split. A couple of members, including a guy named Leonard, reached out to quietly apologize. He admitted that many of them voted with Karen out of fear of being publicly targeted like I had been. But now that she was losing her grip, there was talk of holding a re-election. I told him I wasn't interested in HOA politics. I just wanted to build in peace. A week later, as we installed the final elements of the moat, a twist I hadn't anticipated unfolded. A board member accidentally forwarded me an internal email chain discussing strategies to provoke further violations from me so they could find cause to revoke my permit. The email even included phrases like, "bait him into retaliation," and "use community concern as cover." It was the smoking gun. I printed it out, attached a screenshot of the permit status, and mailed it to every house in the neighborhood with a note. "This is who represents you." That bombshell changed everything. Karen's support base crumbled overnight. Parents, retirees, and even her longtime gossip allies turned on her. The HOA hotline was flooded with complaints, not about me, but about her. Her petition fizzled. The re-election was fast-tracked, and construction on the moat wrapped up just as the first spring rainstorm rolled through. As the water filled the trench and the drawbridge was finally lowered for the first time, kids from the neighborhood came by to watch. Some tossed pennies in for luck. One little girl asked if it was a real castle now. I told her, "Only if you believe in it." She smiled and ran off laughing. It was the best answer I could give. And just like that, what started as a petty feud had become something so much bigger. Karen tried to draw a line. I made that line unforgettable. And it wasn't even finished yet. The next phase was coming, and it would shake the HOA to its foundations. But for now, I stood at the edge of my moat, watching the water reflect the soft glow of LED lights, knowing that for once, I wasn't the one under siege. The morning after the moat was filled and glowing like some kind of suburban miracle, I woke up to a thick envelope taped to my front door with bright red markers scribbled across it. Urgent HOA legal notice. I didn't even need to open it to guess what it was. Karen wasn't the type to back down just because she'd lost her title and neighborhood support. Sure enough, the notice inside was a cease and desist letter from the HOA's legal representative. It claimed I was creating a hazardous obstruction, endangering foot traffic, and causing psychological distress to neighboring residents due to aggressive visual landscaping. That last part made me laugh out loud. I'd never been accused of aggressive landscaping before. I almost framed it. But as funny as the language was, I took the letter seriously. That's where my friend Jordan came in. He was an attorney who specialized in zoning, land disputes, and legal overkill. We'd been roommates in college, and he owed me big from a drunken incident involving a campus golf cart, a raccoon, and 3 campus cops. I sent him the letter and called him up. His response? "You're not just clean, you're sparkling. Let's have some fun with this." Jordan drafted a blistering legal response that cited half a dozen local ordinances, my approved permits, and an older case where an HOA in the next county had tried to remove a backyard pond and lost spectacularly. He even threw in a claim of targeted harassment, citing Karen's sabotage attempt, the forged property sketch, and the now-leaked emails from the board. We copied the county clerk, the zoning board, and every current HOA member. The message was clear. Try it, and you'll lose more than just your reputation. While Karen tried to rally support for the lawsuit, I focused on finishing the moat's final touches. The drawbridge was installed and functional, rising and lowering with the quiet hum of solar-powered hydraulic. I programmed it to raise every night at 10 p.m. sharp, which somehow bothered Karen even more than the moat itself. A neighbor told me she stood on her lawn the first night it raised and screamed, "This isn't Game of Thrones," to no one in particular. But her tactics were getting more desperate. A few days after the legal exchange, she filed a formal complaint with the county claiming the moat was a disguised swimming pool and thus required fencing, lifeguards, and child-proof entry. That was a stretch even for her. The county inspector returned and, after 5 minutes of checking specs and measuring depths, gave the most half-hearted shrug I'd ever seen and said, "It's a trench with style. You're fine." I offered him coffee. He accepted. That night, though, I noticed something off. The LED lights on the south side of the moat weren't working. I went to investigate and found the wires had been cut, clean, precise, and deliberate. I checked the security cameras and, just like clockwork, there was Karen, hunched over the stone edge with wire cutters and a flashlight. I downloaded the footage and called the sheriff. This time, it wasn't just about trespassing or sabotage. Cutting electrical lines, even low-voltage ones, falls under vandalism with intent. The sheriff didn't even hesitate. He paid Karen a visit the next morning, and the whole neighborhood watched from their porches as he knocked on her door. She tried to put on a show of confusion, claiming she'd just been gardening nearby, but the footage said otherwise. The sheriff left with a written warning, but word spread fast. Her grip on the neighborhood, once ironclad, now cracked and crumbling, was turning into a punchline. Meanwhile, the moat was getting popular. Neighborhood kids asked if they could put remote-controlled boats in it. I said yes, as long as they didn't crash them into the drawbridge. One dad even offered to build a mini lighthouse on the edge as a joke. I agreed. What started as an act of revenge was becoming something better, a landmark, a gathering point, and a monument to standing your ground. Then came the meeting that changed everything. One of the HOA members accidentally forwarded me an email thread meant for internal use. The subject line was simple: Plan B. Inside was a discussion between remaining board members about ways to escalate the situation to trigger an ordinance review. One suggestion was to file an anonymous complaint about toxic water contamination. Another was to fabricate a safety incident involving a child almost falling in. It was the smoking gun I didn't even know I needed. Jordan nearly burst out laughing when I showed him. "They're practically handing you a lawsuit," he said. "Want to hit them with a full civil harassment claim?" I didn't answer immediately. I had something else in mind. Instead of a lawsuit, I printed every email, labeled it clearly, and made copies for every single home in the neighborhood. Then, I walked door to door, personally handing them out with a simple line: "Thought you'd want to know how your HOA really operates." Some residents were stunned. Others weren't surprised but were glad someone was finally putting it all in black and white. Karen, meanwhile, went silent. That weekend, the neighborhood voted on whether to call an emergency board election. The vote passed with 91% approval. Karen tried to contest the ballot count, but the results were final. She wasn't just voted off the board, she was banned from holding any HOA position for 5 years. It was poetic. But the chaos didn't stop there. A week later, a former treasurer came forward with accusations that Karen had used HOA funds for personal purchases. A forensic audit revealed thousands of dollars unaccounted for, landscaping expenses for her private backyard, catered events labeled as community outreach, and even a mysterious $1,200 charge for decorative garden armor. The sheriff came back, this time with a warrant. Karen was taken away in handcuffs. It was surreal, watching her get into the patrol car while neighbors filmed on their phones. For someone who once fined me for leaving my garbage bins out 15 minutes too long, it was the ultimate downfall. The HOA board was gutted. 3 more members resigned. I was nominated for the presidency, but I declined. I wasn't interested in power. I just wanted to enjoy my garage and my moat in peace. Instead, I suggested a community-wide revamp of the bylaws with public input. No more secret meetings, no more petty citations, and definitely no more weaponized landscaping rules. As things settled, my moat became something of a suburban legend. The local paper ran a follow-up story titled, "The Man Who Dug Back," featuring a photo of me leaning on the drawbridge with a mug of coffee. People honked when they drove by. Someone even left a plastic flamingo wearing a knight's helmet in my yard. But my favorite part came one sunny afternoon when I saw 2 boys, maybe 10 or 11, sketching on the curb across the street. I walked over and asked what they were doing. One of them looked up and said, "We're drawing a map for our game. Your house is the castle." I grinned and told them they'd better add some dragons to guard it. Because in the end, I hadn't just built a garage extension. I hadn't just dug a trench. I'd built something else entirely, proof that you don't have to back down when someone tries to rule through fear. You just have to know where to draw the line. Or in my case, dig one. It had been almost 2 weeks since Karen's arrest, but the shock waves from that moment were still rippling through the neighborhood like the gentle current flowing through my moat. People who used to walk with their heads down now greeted each other with nods, smiles, even the occasional potluck invitation. The atmosphere felt lighter, freer, like the entire community had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. But beneath that peace was an undercurrent of disbelief, because no one, not even the loudest Karen critics, ever imagined she'd go down in handcuffs. The charges were serious: financial misconduct, falsifying HOA documents, and obstruction of official proceedings were just the beginning. When investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Karen had quietly established a discretionary landscaping fund that didn't exist in any official budget. She'd used that phantom account to fund everything from personal spa visits to luxury patio furniture for her backyard. One receipt showed a purchase of a 5-tier marble fountain listed under Community and Trance Decor that no one had ever seen outside her own garden. As the legal process unfolded, the HOA found itself in complete disarray. The acting president, Leonard, called an emergency town hall meeting to address the residents directly. It was held in the community center, the same building where Karen had once refused to let me bring in homemade lemonade for a meeting because outside beverages violated decorum. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched Leonard step up to the microphone with visible nervousness. He started by acknowledging what everyone already knew, that Karen had betrayed the trust of the community and manipulated the rules for her personal gain. He apologized, not just as a board member, but as someone who had stayed quiet too long. Then he did something no one expected. He asked the residents to submit suggestions for rewriting the HOA's bylaws from scratch. No more fine print loopholes, no more vague power clauses, and no more unaccountable committees. Everything would be reviewed in the open, with community votes on major decisions. The room, filled with retirees, young families, and long-time residents, erupted in applause. I stood at the back, leaning against the wall, arms folded. For the first time since the whole mess began, I felt like something was changing. And then Leonard gestured toward me. He thanked me, out loud, for pushing back. He didn't mention the Moat by name, but everyone knew what he meant. I gave a small nod and slipped out quietly after the meeting. I wasn't looking for attention. I had my garage, my moat, and my peace. That was enough. But the story didn't end there. About a week later, I received a notice from the county planning department. It wasn't a complaint, it was an invitation. The county was holding a public design showcase to celebrate innovative residential solutions that blended form, function, and sustainability. Somehow, my moat had made the shortlist. Apparently, someone in the stormwater division had submitted it for consideration under urban runoff diversion using decorative means. I didn't know whether to laugh or frame the letter. Ray was ecstatic. He insisted we take new photos, document the build process, and write up a full presentation. He even convinced me to name the project. I settled on Boundary Redefined. It had a nice ring to it. At the showcase, our little moat stood proudly among other projects like vertical gardens and solar-integrated rooftop. But none of them had a retractable drawbridge or glow-in-the-dark koi markers. People stopped at our table with amused curiosity. A few engineers even took note. One woman whispered, "You made your yard into a castle. That's the kind of energy we need more of." While the moat was winning over architects and local officials, Karen was fighting a losing battle from inside a cell. Her court date was set, and her legal team tried one last desperate tactic, a civil countersuit against me for emotional distress, public humiliation, and reputational damage. I only found out because Jordan called me laughing so hard he could barely speak. We filed a motion to dismiss before the ink was dry on her complaint. The judge didn't even entertain the idea. He threw the case out within minutes, reportedly shaking his head the entire time. Karen's attorney gave an interview afterward trying to spin the whole thing as a tragic misunderstanding involving passionate civic engagement. The press wasn't buying it. Public opinion had shifted too far. Karen had become a local cautionary tale, a meme, and a symbol all at once. One viral post showed her mugshot next to a sign that read, "Beware the HOA Queen of Hearts." Another was a screenshot of her yelling about medieval architecture next to my glowing moat with the caption, "She picked the wrong peasant." Meanwhile, the HOA board, now operating with transparency for the first time in years, released their first public budget report. It detailed every dollar spent and planned, including a proposal for a small community park. Guess what they were using as the model for the water feature? A scaled-down version of the moat. I couldn't believe it. The same HOA that had fined me for building too close to a made-up line was now asking for design input from the guy who turned that line into a tourist attraction. I still wasn't interested in joining the board, but I did offer to consult. Ray and I met with the new landscape committee and showed them how to build water features that doubled as drainage systems. We even recommended affordable solar lighting options and motion sensors for safety. It felt good to help, even better to know that the system had started working for the people it was supposed to serve. On one of those afternoons, while marking spots on a blueprint with Ray near the moat, a neighbor approached, Mr. Beckett, a retired school principal who had always kept to himself. He looked at the water, then at me, and said, "You know, we all used to think this place was peaceful because it was quiet. Turns out, it's peaceful now because someone stood up." He gave me a firm nod and walked away. I didn't know what to say, but his words stayed with me. The final chapter of Karen's reign came quietly. No more screaming fits, no more emails in all caps, no more citations scribbled in Sharpie. Her house went up for sale under a different real estate agent, and within a month, it was gone. No one knew where she moved, and no one really cared. Her name slowly vanished from every HOA record, scrubbed clean like she had never been there at all. But the moat remained, not as a monument to conflict, but to resilience. Every evening, as the sun dipped low and the lights began to shimmer on the water's surface, I'd sit on the edge of my porch with a coffee or a beer and watch the neighborhood breathe. Sometimes kids played near the edge. Sometimes couples strolled by and took pictures. Once in a while, someone would wave and say, "Still the coolest yard on the block." I didn't argue. What started as an absurd act of spite had become something much more. I hadn't planned for any of it. I just wanted to build a garage. But when someone draws a line and tries to shrink your world, the only answer is to expand it, to dig deeper, go bolder, and make the line unforgettable. And in my case, to fill it with water, lights, and a little bit of legend. Spring turned into summer, and the neighborhood seemed to blossom in more ways than just the gardens. With Karen gone and the HOA restructured, people started coming out of their shells. The Saturday silence was now filled with lawnmowers, kids' laughter, and neighbors waving from driveways instead of peering out from behind curtains. My moat had gone from being a symbol of protest to something more whimsical, almost like it anchored a kind of suburban fairy tale. Parents brought their kids by just to look at the drawbridge. Someone even started calling my place the fortress, and I heard it enough times that I stopped correcting anyone. The community garden we'd planned during the HOA overhaul had started to take shape behind the clubhouse. Several neighbors, inspired by what had happened with the moat and the new democratic policies, came together to build it. Raised beds, compost bins, and even a tool-sharing shed popped up within weeks. I volunteered some of the leftover materials from my own project, including solar lights, and helped Ray install a small gravity-fed irrigation system that, no coincidence, was supplied with runoff from the moat's overflow tank. It was a poetic full circle. The line that once divided now literally helped things grow. Of course, not everyone embraced the new vibe right away. A few of the old guard who had stayed quiet during Karen's reign tried to grumble about the relaxed enforcement rules. One man claimed the new board was letting things get too casual. But when the same man brought it up during a meeting, the board politely pointed to the budget, now balanced for the first time in years, and the record participation numbers in neighborhood events. He didn't say much after that. Meanwhile, the moat kept evolving. After the design showcase, a local artist offered to build a sculpture on the edge of the water, a whimsical metal dragon curled around a mailbox, with eyes that glowed at night. I agreed immediately. It was installed with the help of a few neighborhood teens who were getting credit for a summer art program. That dragon quickly became the unofficial mascot of the street. People started leaving rubber ducks and toy swords near it, like it was some sort of mini shrine. I didn't mind. Every little thing added another layer to the story. Then came the day I got a letter from a local high school teacher. She'd read about the moat in an article and wanted to know if I'd come speak to her architecture class. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't an architect. I was just a guy with a garage and a grudge. But she insisted. She said the students were working on a unit about adaptive spaces and how people could use design to navigate challenges. I agreed, thinking it'd be a one-time thing. It wasn't. That one class turned into 3, and the students asked questions that surprised me. They didn't care about the feud. They wanted to know how I stayed calm, how I used the rules to win, and how I turned something functional into something artistic. I left those sessions feeling oddly proud. Not because of the moat, but because something as silly and petty as an HOA dispute had sparked creativity and discussion that actually meant something. Around the same time, a new family moved into Karen's old house. Young couple, 2 kids, a dog named Beans that barked like a cartoon character. I was worried at first, worried they might have heard the wrong version of the story, worried they'd be standoffish because of what came before. But on their first weekend, they came over with lemonade and said, "We heard about the moat. We love it. Our kids are obsessed." And just like that, a ghost was replaced with warmth. As the weeks passed, the HOA finalized their new charter. Among the changes were limits on emergency meetings, mandatory public votes on fines above a certain threshold, and a new clause that people jokingly called the Moat Rule. It stated that any non-traditional landscaping project must be evaluated not just on aesthetics but on its functionality and community impact. Essentially, they codified what I'd done into policy. And I wasn't even mad. I thought it was brilliant. Karen's name, once mentioned daily, became more of a punchline. There were still memes floating around the local Facebook group, her mugshot photoshopped onto movie posters, her infamous "This isn't Europe" rant turned into ringtone clips. But people moved on, as they should. The drama faded, and in its place was something better. A neighborhood that remembered but didn't obsess, that joked but didn't hate, that learned and didn't forget. One of my favorite moments came quietly. I was sitting on my porch late one evening, watching the soft glow of the moat lights ripple across the water. A few frogs had taken up residence along the rocks, and the dragon statue cast just enough of a shadow to look like it was breathing. That's when Javier, my neighbor from down the street, walked by with his daughter on his shoulders. She looked at the moat and whispered, "That's the house that made the whole neighborhood better." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. In the end, all of it, the fines, the threats, the sabotage, the trench, the headlines, had led to this moment. A community that had learned how to stand up, how to speak out, and how to come together. And me, just a guy who wanted to park his truck in peace, sitting quietly on a porch that overlooked a 12-foot moat built out of spite, but remembered for so much more. And the best part? The line that started it all, the one they claimed I crossed, is still there. Only now, it's underwater. And no one's ever going to question it again.